Guys, welcome to another episode of Metal Mastermind. Co-founder and your co-host today, Jason Stallworth, and co-founder, co-host, the great
Jan Candelis.
Dude, what is up?
I'm good, man. Today's an interesting topic. We are talking about good and bad mixes and what are the implications of that in music, especially metal music, of course. But I think many times I feel as musicians, sometimes we could either be over controlling about the mix and the final product. Sometimes we're not enough. There's also, budgets and all that kind of stuff. So I think when it comes to mixing, it's definitely one of the most critical stages of making your music, and it's important to get it right. What are your thoughts initially on that, Jay?
My initial thoughts is there's got to be some sort of balance, because you can have albums that are just mixed superior, everything's clear, but if the songwriting doesn't resonate with you, then it doesn't really matter how good the mix is. But then you don't want to use any excuse to take shortcuts and just submit a bad mix, right? It's got to be decent. But like we were talking about earlier, before we started the podcast, because as you know, we kind of start the podcast always before we click records. Like, man, we should have been recording that. So we're rehashing some of our conversation. It just works that way. It works well. But we talked about some bands, some of the older bands that maybe didn't have the technology. Some maybe did, but just didn't, use it properly or whatever. But their mixes aren't that great. But I couldn't really imagine the album any other way. The songwriting's great, So I think there's a balance of achieving a good mix that sounds great, but also you don't want to be held up. You don't want to be your own worst enemy by continuously. I'll give the analogy of hammering a nail into a piece of wood. Once it's there, you don't want to keep hammering it because you damage the wood. And I think
Right.
if you overthink it, you can actually make it worse than what it was before. So I think there's just a balance, knowing what sounds good and knowing when good enough is your perfection.
That's a really good point. You can spend a long time on mixing.
Yeah. A long time.
But at the same time, right, it all comes down to the song. You can have a great mix and the production quality is stellar, but if the song is bad, the song is bad, That is so true. And I'm sure we've heard many, many great mixes over many terrible songs.
So let me ask you this: Do you have a favorite song? I'm not saying it's your favorite song, but a song that you really like a lot, but the mix is just horrible, but you still like the song so much that the mix doesn't bother you.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of here. Nile is a great example. We were just and you and I were just talking about Nile, and it's funny because Nile.
You turned me on to him, man.
Nile is an amazing band. They're absolutely killer. I feel like it took them a while to nail their tone in mixes, because they've tried many different approaches. Everything that I've heard, from Catacombs all the way to Vile. I mean, there's a ton of how would I say, a really wide spread of styles of mixes with Nile.
Yeah.
And when it comes to their song, "Evil to Cast Out Evil," it's a great tune, but the guitars are just like way too loud. Literally, the drums are so tucked underneath the guitars. It's like, is there even a drummer in this track?
Oh man.
It kind of reminds me of the Cliff Burton and Justice for All.
Justice for Cliff. Yeah.
But it's like the revenge of Cliff Burton, where there's so much bass and there's not enough drums.
Oh, dude. Oh man.
So yeah, Nile's a great example of that. I mean, but they've got such cool songwriting. Everything about them is just like Egyptian mythology and all that kind of stuff. And Carl Sanders really gets into all of his subjects with like a lot of detail. He's an Egyptologist. He really knows what he's
Yeah.
talking about.
That's cool, dude. That's really yeah. You turned me on to it, man. Yeah, I was like, Ken, dude. I remember texting you one morning. I was in the gym. I'm like, I need something new to listen to because when you're going through the iTunes stations, you play it. Whether you listen to iTunes, Spotify, whatever, you will you will create a station based on a song you like, right? So, and this way
Right.
you hear, which is the beauty of today's world of music, you get to hear stuff that you otherwise wouldn't hear. And I'm like,
Right.
man, but they kind of keep recycling the same stuff after a while. It's like, okay, give me something new. So you told me about Nile. I'm like, okay, beep, beep, beep. Typed it in. I'm like, whoa, yeah, I like this. So brutal stuff, man.
I'm so happy you do. Do you got anything on in your list on what you like as a song, but you hate the mix?
There's a song, and I think the songwriting in this song is just so cool. And it's a I'll say the album, but it's a very particular song. The band is called Before the Dawn. It's their 2007 album, Deadlight. But the song called Dead Song. Like I don't know that I really care for the rest of the music on the album. I might like some of the songs, but Dead Song I love. But
Mm,
the mix on there, it's certainly probably not, up to standards, I guess. It's just bad. It's just not a good mix. But I like the song so much I can still listen to it over and over. And it doesn't the mix isn't bad to where it annoys me to listen to it. It's just like, okay, we could have done some more work on this, but you know what? I love the song so much that I'll listen to the song all the way through.
wow. Yeah. I mean, that's the power of like a really good song. And if you got a really good song and a really good performance, usually you can forgive the production for it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I always find that to be really fascinating, and it's like what we pay attention to as listeners is very very interesting. We tend to feel very connected first with the music,
Yeah,
and if the music is that good, um, we almost just accept the production as it is, and we move on. Um, but sometimes if it's not that great of a song, we really sometimes lean on the production quality to help us get through it.
yeah.
And subconsciously, I think if you don't have a good production foundation, then yeah, I mean that can be very tough, and it'll sound more like a mixtape EP out of a garage band than a production from
Yeah.
a high quality artist.
Instead of drums, it's like tin cans rattling. We were talking earlier about like I love Testament. I think Testament's phenomenal, but their "Practice What You Preach" album, which is I got that album on cassette right when I started getting into metal back then, and started playing guitar. And we're talking about the mix is fine, but the drums, the production of the drums on there, the kick is like tick, 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 it's like this weak little tick tick. And I remember, sleeping one night and just had metal playing in the background. I think I was sleeping on the couch or whatever, and I would always know when a Testament song would come on from that album because it was like a mix tape I had or whatever, or just like I think it's a CD player when it like takes 6 CDs and plays random or whatever, old school CD player. But anyway, I always could tell because always wake me up. I'd hear that little tick 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 part from that album. I love the album, and I can listen to it, front to back. But is it the best mix? No, probably not. Could the drums have been more powerful in that? Yeah, sure they could have.
Yeah, I also think it's important to mention the timeline when these records were made too,
Mhm.
because production quality has increased over time. There's no doubt about it. But you've got actually some pretty good mixes that are older. For example, like bands like Nevermore.
Oh, yeah,
Their
dude,
production
yeah,
quality was like really, really up there.
yeah,
Um, Even without modern certain sample based stuff and whatnot, like they had a great recording engineer, great mix engineer, great mastering engineer, and their songs rocked. So that totally takes it to another level. And I think um, even some legendary bands like Metallica, Metallica, their first record, you could kind of almost forgive the production quality because what they were doing was really so new.
yeah,
They're like the fathers of thrash in many ways.
yeah,
So you start thinking about Kill 'Em All and like Ride the Lightning.
Mhm.
And these albums, which have amazing songs, but they're not the greatest in recording,
Right, right.
it lends itself to, okay, well, where were we at that time, right? And it's almost like a time capsule when you listen to those things. I think when Kirk Hammett, in a recent interview with Rick Beato, he was talking about how Master of Puppets was really their sonic vision realized.
That's what they
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I really think that was it too. That whenever I hear Metallica, I hear that, and that is exactly correct. And that was a great album, and that mix was phenomenal. Even
You
the
had
Black
beef in
Album.
it. Yeah, the black ones are great too,
Totally.
but you had beef and puppets is where you added the ground beef in there, right? Because you
Yeah.
didn't have that beef in the prior albums. But, going back to what we're talking about, like, Kill 'Em All, I couldn't really imagine Kill 'Em All sounding any other way. I don't know that I'd want it to. And even when they start out Seek and Destroy, the guitars are, the second guitar comes in and slightly off just a little bit. Well, they didn't move stuff around to try to perfect anything, all these little nuances that it had. And that's more on the, production side, not so much mixing side. But it was just, I don't know. I couldn't imagine, like you said, it's a time capsule. We're also talking about Van Halen. I just saw on Facebook that on Sammy Hagar's post that they're going to release a collection tour or whatever with the years with Sammy, do a certain era. I think it's like 86 through something. I can't recall. You have to look it up. But he was talking about how they didn't have Pro Tools and all the fancy gadgets. They were recording reel to reel back then. And
Mhm.
so they want to keep that sacred part of it, but also beef it up with today's technology. I guess with the remastering of it. And you had a story about that as well. You told me a story earlier about how Sammy didn't know they were recording.
Oh yeah. When Sammy joined Van Halen, they didn't. I mean, they were recording, but he thought they were just recording scratches.
Scratches, yeah, yeah,
And he was just like, yeah, okay, and they were all chilling at the studio doing their thing. And then, Sammy comes in the next day and Eddie Van Halen says, oh, no, we're done. Like, I already submitted to the record company and, it's getting ready for distribution. The guy's like, what?
yeah. We're gonna save money.
Yeah, he was just like, holy crap, no, that wasn't my final performance.
Oh, dude.
He's like, that sounds great. And if you actually listen to those, like, Panama or Jump or any of those, like, hits that are so famous from Van Halen, you could
Yeah,
hear that the recording quality on those on that record is just wow. Yeah.
yeah.
It's like it's not you could tell there's a rough edge about it.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And but that's actually kind of the charm of Van Halen's records in a sense, right? Because you talking about ultra processed productions, and here is a super organic recording
yeah.
that just throw some mics up, get it on the track, and just like hash it, and let's see what you guys got.
That's kinda my
And
personal approach to it all, man. I love because there's something raw about rock and roll. There's something unpolished about it, about true rock and roll and heavy metal. It's like you almost don't I mean, again, you this is not an excuse to have a crappy mix or crappy performance, but you want that edge. I feel like if things are just perfected too much, if it's overdone, you take the edge away. You take the human side out of it, and it's like, okay, well, it's just like robots playing and singing. It's like, okay, we want some of that edge, some of that, rebellion, if that makes sense?
totally, yeah, that kind of synergy that you get from a group playing in the
Yeah.
same room
Mhm.
is unmatched in overdubbing. Uh, that's what we always did with my hard rock band, Four Trips Ahead. We always went into the studio. We go to a great place called Spin Recording Studios in Long Island City, New York. And we record through an SSL, and we record everybody at the same time. And
That's
it's
awesome,
just
man. Dude.
it's just monstrous, man. It's so much fun. We come in super prepared. We know our parts, and when we capture the recording, it's all the energy is there. And when we do any overdubs, it's building upon that initial energy that we captured, and
Mhm.
that's key. That's key in all of this.
So you might go
Um,
back in and you record the band, but you might go back in and say, "Hey, I want another little guitar part here that you necessarily couldn't do, both those parts at the same time or add in
right,
some harmonies, stuff like that."
right.
I think that is that is absolutely insanely good, and that's what makes, 4 Trips Ahead. Like I've told you when the first time I heard you guys, I like the band a lot, man. You guys sound great, but it's just a raw, organic rock and roll band, dude, and
Yep.
it's everything probably that modern rock isn't, you know? And you guys aren't, uh, I'll say this too, you guys aren't trying to sound like anybody else. You're not trying to sound like an older band, you're not trying to sound modern, you guys sound like just some dudes that wanna record some really solid rock and roll music, and that's what you did, you know?
Well, thank you.
So it's got its own unique, pass that along to the guys if you think about it from Jason here, because it's got its own unique sound, you know?
Yeah, and it's a lot of trust in the people that we work with. Shout out to Johnny Nice and Nick Chimbukas and all these, and Nick Cipriano, these guys who've recorded us before,
Yeah,
and Yosemar Gomez. I mean, they're amazing uh, engineers, and it is very much kind of like the traditional fifth member of the band taking that role as the
yeah,
engineer, because when Chimbukas is behind the board, he's listening, for the first time some of these songs, but he's hearing it in a way where we may have not heard it before. So he gets to sort of chime in on certain things, and as he's doing it, he's writing some of the faders. He's just kind of feeling it
that's
out,
awesome,
and
dude. Yeah,
that is, it's like you're recording and mixing to tape almost, in a sense. He uses all the EQ and the compression from the board and all that kind of stuff, and that plays a pivotal role in the final outcome. Which I wish in most cases more bands would do stuff like that. There are some bands, that still do stuff like that, but I just feel like in a world where we have so much easy access to recording at home, sometimes we just kind of take for granted doing it that way. Which in there are other benefits to that too. I mean,
sure,
if
sure.
they're it's cleaner and all this kind of stuff, but there's nothing like playing with people in the same room. And unless you're doing a solo project and you don't have a band to play with, which is very understandable. If you do have a band, like, record it together and play it together. That's the way to go about it, and that's why you get such great songs from bands like Metallica and Van Halen, because that's their entire premise. They're a group, they're a unit that play together, and they're in synergy with each other. I mean, there are other more modern bands, and I love examples like Ghost,
Mm,
because Ghost do that, exactly, and they've got freaking Andy Wallace behind the board, mixing this stuff. And Andy Wallace is just like a legend of an engineer. I mean, he's up there with guys like Chris Lord Alge, and Andy's mixed guys like Rage Against the Machine and whatnot. So um, those mixes that you get, which they're all using SSL
mm.
as the board.
That's cool,
Um,
man. That's
if
cool.
you're yeah, if you want to have that, kind of snare sound, I mean, you're talking about like a CLA or Andy Wallace type of mix, and they're basically like boosting at like 12K, I think, like 6 dB into a compressor. And that's what's giving that open air like snare sound, and it's like super like pumped and compressed, and it sounds fat. I love that sound. All these guys, they mix into compression, and so that's an interesting token about rock music, and using technology like the SSL boards, which that's what they're doing. Once they created that G bus compressor, the master bus compressor that's on that board, it changed the game for rock. Because before then, all you were doing, a lot of mixes were being, on the Neve consoles in the 70s, and then SSL, they had their A and B series, and then CD, you didn't actually see any production come out of the C or D series, because that was all like beta testing. And then they finally came out with the E console, which had onboard EQ, all that stuff, which people loved. And then the F console was not released. That was also in beta testing because they wanted to put in compression. So here comes the G series, which is the thing that came out in the 80s, which every single rock band just absolutely adores. And to this day, we still have SSL G series consoles in studios because of that legendary sound.
Now explain what SSL is real quick, because I know not all of our listeners probably understand what that is.
Sure. So SSL is solid state logic. It's a brand. It's a brand of mixing console designers, and it is basically the sound that you've heard on most golden age rock and metal music. Um, that production quality of an analog console like that is kind of unmatched, and it's inspired so many pieces of gear into the future of audio technology. I mean, it's so good that we're still even using it, even after warranty is expired and all that kind of stuff. Which, by the way, um, SSL, I think, had about a 30 to 30 year warranty on their consoles.
Dude.
So yeah, they had I mean, some of those consoles are probably just like the tail end of that line is probably just getting out of warranty, which is amazing, and support is like not going to be reachable anymore at that point. So it's been insane, the longevity of that console.
When you believe in your product and it's good, it lives up to its name. I mean, dude, who can do that?
Yeah.
That's
That's
pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting, man. And I like and I don't, Ken, I'm a bit older. I'm 48, and I notice I'm guilty of this too. Of just listening to some of the newer bands and that sort of thing, and it maybe not being my cup of tea. But I don't want to be that person, that old guy that's just stuck in the past. You know, I had some YouTube comment several months ago about an older guy, just kind of trashing today's music or whatever. And I'm like, I get what you're saying, because he's like he's still living in the past, in the 70s and 80s, and I get it. There's some great music that came out of that. I think a lot of that's just pure nostalgia. It's a lot of the 90s and 2000s music I don't really care for, but people that grew up in that era, they love it. And they may not like today's music so much, but they like the 90s and 2000s, right? So I think that has a lot to do with it too. But I don't want to be that person. I refuse to be that person that continues to live in the past. And it's like, well, the new stuff just is not like it used to be, and it's not, and it's not supposed to be. You know, I do sometimes feel bad for the current generation because they keep rehashing stuff. It's like there's not a lot of original stuff out there, like with movies and especially in music. But at the same time, there are a lot of good bands out there. There are a lot of great bands out there. Uh, I'm not into this, the 8-string guitars and all the gent and the down tuning and all that stuff, but I'm glad it exists. I'm glad it exists. And we're kind of getting off topic here. We're getting in more to style, but even with the mixing, though, I don't want to be that person that's like, well, I'm not going to succumb to today's whatever it is just because I'm stuck in the past. I don't want to be that person. You know what I mean? But at the
Right.
same time, I want to hold on, or I want to, I guess, pronounce my own style. You guys, all of you listening, Ken and I mean, what's the motto of Metal Mastermind? What do we say every time? What do we encourage you to do? We encourage you to create your own sound, to continuously develop your own sound and style. And that even comes with mixing as well. You know, if you want to mix something, I don't think you should I don't think you should have the mentality of, well, it's got to be the best modern mix. I got to use all the tools. But it also doesn't have to be, well, I'm going to try to make it sound like something old. I think what we should be focusing on is just make it sound good to you. You know, may what does it sound like to you? It doesn't need to sound just like Killswitch Engage or just like Metallica's first album, right? Two extremes there. What sounds good to you? You know what I mean? What sound you can take advice from people, especially Nick Z. Nick, I'll give a quick plug here with our mixing course. We have a mixing course on metalmastermind.com, our website. So I want to give Nick Z's course a shout out real quick. He goes through some really crucial information throughout that, and the testimonies that we've gotten from people in the course have just been phenomenal. It has changed the way they approach mixing and has made things much easier for them. So yeah, guys, that course, all our courses, metalmastermind.com, but Nick Z's course is called Mixing Producer Overlord, the mixing series. So it's real easy to find on our website there. But yeah, I think it's important though to find your own sound. Like Ken, you just finished mixing Homeric's new album. I know you've got a release coming up for that, probably early 2024. I'm almost done mixing my album, and the thing is 2 years from now, or a year from now, or whenever we mix our next project, whatever that may be, I don't necessarily want it to sound the same. I want something a little different. I want to have a different approach. Maybe better, and I don't even know if better is the word, because that's very subjective. But it would be different. I don't want my next album to sound just like Overcometh that I'm about to release. Ken, you probably don't want the next Homeric album to sound exactly like this one. There's some different textures you might want to throw in. So, just the thoughts on being yourself, being your own musician, and making it sound great, right? But also making it sound like you want it to sound like.
Yeah. Rick Rubin, just famous producer. He's worked on countless records. I can't even begin to name them all. But Rick Rubin, he's a quirky guy, but he says a lot of interesting things. Where, for example, his production process, he doesn't know a single thing about EQ and compression, how it works and how it's applied. He doesn't know. What Rick does is sometimes he will literally lay his body down on the floor in the studio and just close his eyes and listen. And his purpose for doing that is to listen as the listener would,
Yeah.
and not to be distracted by all the gear and all the analytics of the studio. So he gets down on the floor to be a little bit more, I guess, down to earth, quite literally, and tries to just become, put into a space where he can just feel the music, even the vibrations on the ground. So I think that his approach, being a more, I would say, holistic
Yeah.
approach, does have some merit to it, because when he talks about how an artist's music should feel and how it should, come across to the listener, should come across as fully intentional from the artist, that this is what they wanted, that what the artist wanted, not what the listener wanted necessarily. That the listener would have to bear the brunt of understanding the artist and what the artist was trying to say. It's kind of like saying, well, did Leonardo da Vinci, make the Mona Lisa for the general public? No, he didn't. He made it in his vision, the way that he thought it should be created. And we as the public try to interpret his vision, right? There's a lot of power in that. I think people forget that as the artist, you are the messenger of, so much that is in the ethereal, the things that we can't necessarily touch. Now you can tap into that sort of feed, and it's your job as the artist to interpolate that into something that you can, I think, associate as your work and your message, the thing that you wanted to communicate. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to, mixing, I mean, just mix it how, like, I always thought of it as just make the best music that you thought you could make. That the coolest thing that you ever heard in your life is what your music should be, and you should strive for that sound. And it doesn't mean, you might have some influences here and there, but it's not like you're trying to recreate somebody else's music, because you're not.
Yeah.
Even in, and Jason, you played on my record, so you understand that even when I do something like a cover, the cover song itself is completely redone in a way that wasn't even remotely close to the original, like, recording
No,
that
not
the
at all.
band made. It's completely different in my own way, and I've thought about these cover songs as a way to make it my own. And if I had made this song, this is how I actually would have made it. And it's not me trying to be traditional to the original music. It's my interpretation of that music, which I think you, as artists, you should heavily consider. I give a lot of thanks to the Sonic Arts Center at City College when I was in that program, because that was actually one of our challenges. Actually, is creating a cover song and making it our own, and not doing it the same way as they did it in the recording. So that was a very good skill that I learned, and it helped me to interpret music in ways that I like to hear music. So that takes a little bit of practice, and I think it's a worthwhile endeavor that as you're learning, you go ahead and you're mimicking some of your heroes. But if you mimic your heroes to the T, you can learn their skills, sure, but you don't necessarily develop your own voice. So, but if you go ahead and you try to attempt recreating their music in your own way, this is why, like, DJs and remixes are, like, actually super important, because people love to hear other ways of their favorite songs. And it's a fantastic way to build an audience if you want to tap into something that they know,
Yeah.
but you now have your own flavor to it, right? So it's a great, like, gateway drug into your music. I think that's so important, and people should really consider that a little bit more often, when they try to make a cover band, or they try to make just a cover just for their album.
Yeah, I love that concept. I would much rather hear a rendition, someone's own style of a cover song, than the actual cover song. Look, if I want to hear the exact note for note of a song being performed by someone, I'll just put it on the record, man, because I don't, to
Exactly.
me, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful to the artists. This is not meant in that way at all, but I don't really see anything special about learning another song note for note. I just somebody else wrote it. It's like, okay, yay, you can play it. Here's a cookie, you know. And I get it. You want to build up your skill. If you're a guitar player, you're wanting to learn Malmsteen and stuff like that. And I understand that, but I'm just I don't get excited about because someone can play this. Well, you didn't write it. So if you're doing a rendition, you're in a sense rewriting that song. And like you said, can you want to have your own voice. Like, okay, I love the song. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to other people, but here's my take on it. It's you guys know I play 2 to 3 live shows a week, solo acoustic gigs. I had one on Labor Day, really nice show on Labor Day. Actually, I made a YouTube video out of that one because I wanted to highlight the venue too. 'Cause it's a really cool place called Jerry's Dockside in Gibsonton, Florida. I'm playing at Killing Curly Winery tonight. I've got a gig tonight, Wednesday night, and of course, this podcast is gonna be out, 2 weeks after we film it. So this all happened 2 weeks ago as you're listening. But anyway, I never do a song note for note because for one, I don't have the vocal range of most of the people, guys and girls from the '80s. So I transpose all the songs. Now, you're still keeping it to the point where, okay, I can tell what this is. I know this is a song by heart. I know this is Summer '69 or the Outfields, Your Love or whatever. But I have my own style that I put on it. And I found that people really appreciate that. They really appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, don't be afraid if you're doing a cover song to pour your own style into that, and what can you make it into? Good
Yeah,
stuff.
I think that's a super important point. your artistry, and I know we're talking about artistry now, but like it feeds into your production.
It does, yeah.
That's just, they go together.
Yeah.
Because the production is how you envision, in a more tangible form, what is in your mind.
Yeah.
So I think technical prowess, and I actually had this discussion with a student yesterday at my class, where I think there is a fine line of overproducing and not producing enough. There's, if you're an artist that has never touched a mixing console or never touched anything remotely close to a DAW, then you don't know enough to
Right,
know
right.
how to achieve what you want, which is a problem. Then there's also the other side of that, whereas you know too much, but you're distracted by all the, maybe the acquisition of gear, or just wanting to get the technicalities of it so correct that you forget to make music.
Right.
So there's
There's a balance.
there's two sides of the coin, and it's that ridge that's in the middle, which you have said before in many different discussions. It's like that fine ridge in between a coin that is both sides.
Yeah, yeah.
Where
That's a
you
Robert
have to,
Kiyosaki quote. If you can, if you sit on the edge of the coin, you can see both sides. It's not heads or tails. Sit on the edge so you can see both. Right. So
exactly.
it's a really
And
good point.
that viewpoint is so useful here. And you need to know just enough, to be able to create what it is that you want to create in a technical manner, but then you need to know just not enough to be able to keep that
Sweet.
sort of childlike inspiration alive, and not stamp it too hard by being so technical about things. So, otherwise you just become the engineer and not the artist, right? So that's an important distinction, that I want you to think about as you're making your record, and how you decide, to delegate who's going to work on your record. Because really, the way that this conversation came up in as with my student was, "Hey Ken, I saw this, technology of video mapping, with your music via MIDI,
Mhm.
and creating your light show out of that." And I was just like, let me just stop you there for a second, because it's like, are you studying audio engineering to like learn how to create your music to come to life, or are you trying to be a lighting technician, and are you trying to be a video technician and all these things? He's like, I'm trying to learn a little bit about animation. I'm like, okay, here's the thing. And I told him, I said, look, there's a reason why in my record I did not do the artwork, despite the fact that I actually come from a
Yeah.
visual art background. It's because I don't have the time. I don't have the time, the energy to dissipate into something that has 30 pieces of artwork, that has all this, and they're paintings nonetheless, right? And I already have this like concept that I'm trying to work out, and I've got the technicalities of a producer to make the sonics come to life, but I can't be dibble dabbling in art as well. And I told him, I said, look, like, wouldn't it make more sense that you just focus on your concept? Okay, focus on making the record, because by the time you're ready to do something like a tour, which could be a long time, it could be a long time, wouldn't you think that maybe somebody who knows how to do lighting and has been doing it for a long time, maybe as long as you've been working on your record, probably can make a better light show than you do? And he was just like, yeah, you kind of make a point. I was like, yeah. So don't focus on these details, these technicalities that are just like,
Yeah.
you're not even ready for that yet. So why are you going to make a video map wall and all this kind of stuff, and pre-program a light show when you don't even have a record yet? So, focus on the concept, focus on the meat that needs to be eaten by your audience before you start adding sprinkles and stuff like that. That's all cherry on top stuff.
No, that makes sense, and
So,
that's why I'm having Nick Z master my album, dude. I'm not gonna try to I know nothing about mastering, and I know a lot of people think, "Well, it's just bringing the volume up to" no, that's not at all what it is, right? That's
definitely
a very
not.
small part of it. So, Nick Z masters I was gonna have him mixed, but we had some budget constraints. I ran a campaign for that for post production. So we raised enough for the mixing part and the artwork, which outsourcing that as well, photography, and there are a few other things, right? Uh, the mixing part, though, I enjoy mixing my own stuff. I don't necessarily want to mix anyone else's, but I'm like I know what I hear. Now, a lot of you folks listening right now, you probably mix your own stuff as well, and or you might not have the budget to hire someone to mix because mixing a real person that's going to mix your record is going to cost thousands. And I won't say how much in the thousands, but it's going to be thousands, probably three,
Yeah.
4, or 5, who knows, right? So if you don't have that kind of budget, and I realize that not everybody has that, you're probably wanting to mix yourself. So that's why we have courses on our website, by the way. That's why we have Nick Z's mixing course. And I would also say that limit your feedback that you get from people to certain people that are true experts in the industry. I have a handful of experts in the music industry listening to my mix to give me feedback. Ken, obviously, you're one of them, and you gave me some great feedback, some very detailed feedback, like very detailed in the EQ spectrum, right? That's the type of feedback I would never get from anyone else, right? You're very specific. Ed Aborn, the drummer for Siren. Well, he's been in the music industry his entire life. He's deep into it, right? So yeah, I trust his opinion. So and I've got a couple other people that I've sent that I trust, but I'm not sending it out to the whole world like, hey, give me your feedback, everybody, because a lot of times people aren't, they'll either say, oh, it's great, just because you did it, or they'll give you feedback that might not be so relevant to the actual mix. But all that said, though, is get help with things that you aren't the expert in. That's really my point here. Like Ken, you're not going to try to, even though you are an artist, you can do the artwork, but you're busy focusing on this other thing, the meat and potatoes of the project. So you outsource that to someone else.
Yeah. I mean, you know what I think it is? It's I think it's a maturity of your process where you start to realize you can't do everything.
Can't do it
When you're in
well
the
anyway,
beginning,
right?
yeah, and when you're in the beginning of your process, I think it's a natural response to want to try and do it all yourself. And because you haven't seen the scope of what your project can be. And the bigger you make it out as your final idea, I think, and the more mature you become, I think the more you value the time that you have and where you put it.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I think that's why with people like you, you're absolutely so dead set when you're making something like Overcometh come to life. It's like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and like I'm not doing more than that because this is my role, and I need other people that have better skills in doing what I'm trying to do come and make it the best that it can be, far than my own talents can. And I think it takes a lot of humility to do that. But I think you grow into that person over time. Um, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're either you're mature and in your own right, you probably can relate. And if you're young and you're still seeking inspiration, I think just take this kind of feedback on approaching your production and make sure that you're allocating the amount of time that you can that you can do well, because that's where it counts. You can always find somebody else to help you along the road, and people will, because they either like what you're doing or they like you as an individual. You'll find people to help you along the way. and you just have to kind of trust in that. I don't think there's any other way to really say it. I mean, I only came across Jason from meeting him in a group that was focused on marketing. You know, and that is far removed from, you know, making music, because Jason and I were trying to understand the principles of how to create our brand on a music level, but we were focused on our own brands, and we're taking that sort of concept of, okay, this is where we really learned it. I think it's we can't do everything. You know, we're trying to do you know, our own music. We're trying to market our music. We're trying to make money of our music, and then all along that, there's so many little details that have to come up in order to make it successful. And all these little details, you figure out like, oh man, okay, so I could do this, and this, but maybe it would be smarter for me if I had somebody else do this part of this, and that part of that, because then I can just keep doing this, and this, and not that and that, right? So, yeah, it's just a fabulous journey. Honestly, it really is. I think music has changed so much ever since the golden age of rock, and we're here now in this position where we actually have to be more careful about how we run our business, because it is a business. And musicians are notorious for being overly clingy and making, you know, hodling their baby and not letting go of it. But you got to let the eagle wings spread and fly, right? So
Yeah, at some point you had to say, okay, pencils down. I'm moving on to the next project. This is done, and
exactly.
it's like the whole, the nail being hammered into the wood analogy. Once the nail's in there, just leave it, man. You're good. Do the next thing and move on. Because if you keep beating that nail into the wood, you're going to damage the wood, and it's not going to be any good anymore. So you can actually set yourself back quite a bit by overthinking it. But again, the balance. You don't want a crappy mix either. So, dude, this is a great conversation, man. Because again, there are a lot of bands I like. There are a lot of older albums that don't have the best mixes in the world, but I couldn't really imagine them any other way. And there are some cruddy mixes too, new and old. And again, just because the mix is great, well, it doesn't mean you'll like the album. There may be a lot of bands out there that are mixed to the T and, and just processed, and it just sounds perfect, but the songs may not resonate with you. So
Right.
there's a balance in all this stuff, guys. But dude, on that note, do you have a song of the week that you'd like to put out there?
You know what? Yeah. Whitechapel. This is Exile. Great tune.
Excellent.
Something that I've listened to actually ever since I started really playing drums for real. And it's really hard hitting, uh, you know, metal. It's Whitechapel. I've seen them a couple times live, and every time they get on, man, the pit just erupts.
Dude, I bet.
I love Whitechapel. They're great performers, and the drummer is absolutely killer. It's one of the reasons why I loved them so much in the beginning of my drumming.
Well, I'm going to take us back a few decades with my song of the week to 1987 and talking about mixes, probably not anywhere near what today's mixes are, but it's Dawkins' album Back for the Attack, and the specific song is the first track on there, Kiss of Death. Now, I'm a big George Lynch fan. I just love his style. He's just got this really wicked twist to his playing, and it kind of just pulls you in. So, Kiss of Death, first track on the Back for the Attack album by Dawkins, 1987.
Oh my god, what was that Dawkins song? I'm looking for it now.
Mr. Scary.
There is that one. But wasn't there one? It was Back for the Attack, Dream Warriors.
Oh, on Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, that's a
Dream
killer
Warriors.
tune, dude.
I love Dream Warriors.
Yeah, that's a really cool song. I love that song too. The video was cool too on MTV. This is back when
Yeah.
MTV actually played videos. Miss Headbanger's Ball,
When it
man.
was actually music television.
Yeah, it was real music television. I don't know what you call it now. Anyway,
Well,
but guys,
right.
we want to thank you so much for being a part of Metal Mastermind. We do appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. Head over to metalmastermind.com, guys. Check out the courses we have. We've got guitar courses, music theory courses, vocal production, everything, building your own studio. So just go to metalmastermind.com, check those out, guys. And until next week, as always, create your own sound.